Just recording a quick video to explain the difference between Article 5 like and NATO. In the past little while I've seen lots of comments like this, even from a former US ambassador to Russia in the form of Michael McFaul. Instead of NATO-like security guarantees for Ukraine, what about NATO security guarantees for Ukraine? And another commenter, if you're Vladimir Putin, why on earth would you oppose NATO membership for Ukraine but then support NATO-like security guarantees, really meaning Article 5? Probably a distinction without a difference in his mind. So first of all, what Article 5 is. We'll get to the exact text in just a moment, but at a very high level, Article 5 essentially means if you get attacked, we will come to your defense. Highly educated people in the West seem to think that joining NATO is merely Article 5 and an innocuous signing of bureaucratic paper, but it's actually quite a bit more than this. What NATO actually is. NATO membership means joining NATO's integrated military command, often housing NATO, really US military bases on your territory, joint military exercises with all of the countries that are members of NATO, and quite often hosting US nuclear weapons on your territory, as Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, Italy and Turkey do, which the vast majority of people are unaware of. And lastly, interoperability with NATO weapon systems, meaning you're essentially buying lots of defense material from the big primes in the US and kind of vendor lock-in with the military industrial complex. All of these things are intolerable to Russia, and you'll see these things are quite different from just the mere Article 5 security guarantee offer. Even more importantly, NATO membership means something deeply emotional from the vantage point of Russia and the Russian president, particularly that Russia feels as though it was promised when it was the Soviet Union, the late 1980s, going on to the early 1990s, that NATO membership, that NATO expansion would not continue further eastwards, and many people assert that it doing so was actually one of the key causes of the present conflict. The US would never allow an equivalent to NATO in its totality on its border for an adversary, and that's evidenced by the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's quite often said at the same time that there ought to be security guarantees for Russia as part of this agreement. Now that doesn't mean in any sense that the US is going to come to Russia's defense if Russia were to be attacked. My understanding of that is that it would be offering Article 5 to Ukraine whilst simultaneously promising Russia that these further elements of NATO would never become in effect in Ukraine. So it would be having the Article 5 guarantee, but Ukraine not joining NATO's integrated military command, not housing US military bases on the territory, Ukraine not being involved in joint military exercises with wider NATO, and obviously not hosting nuclear weapons, affirming the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. How did Article 5 come about? How did the actual text, the language come about? Because the history of these discussions is fascinating. The wording of NATO's Article 5 was the object of heated negotiations. Europeans wanted members to commit themselves to military and other action, while US diplomat George Kennan proposed only such action as may be necessary. Eventually, a compromise was reached. In the event of an attack, members will assist the relevant country by taking forthwith such action as it deems necessary, including the use of armed force. If we go up to Article 5 on the NATO website, you can see that is the actual language of Article 5. Such action as it deems necessary, including the use of armed force, to restore and maintain the security of the North Atlantic area. Not since the ratification of the United States Constitution have so many men spent so much time drafting and debating so few words. Yesterday I read another critique arguing an Article 5-like US undertaking for Ukraine would also remove Congress from responsibility for declaring war. This is not accurate. President Truman could only get the Washington Treaty, which founded NATO, through the US Senate after then Secretary of State Dean Acheson provided a written assurance that it did not automatically commit the US to military action in support of NATO allies, and Senators Arthur Vandenberg and Tom Connolly insisted that the treaty language preserve Congress's constitutional prerogative to declare war and avoid automatic military obligations. Surely the same would be done here for Ukraine. Article 11 of the NATO treaty says, "This treaty shall be ratified and its provisions carried out by the parties in accordance with their respective constitutional processes." So a specific decision on US military action would remain with Congress. This means that a US commitment to mutual defence is strong, but not automatic. I don't in any way expect for this to catch on, but it would be more accurate for the media to say an Article 5 plus Article 11 like security guarantee. And just lastly, one further very important clause that I consider ought to be added for this instance. If Ukraine attacks Russia, and this is post-armistice, the security guarantee is rendered void and the US will not support Ukraine, such that any false flag attack by Ukraine ought to leave Ukraine without the guarantee, and therefore we have very strong incentives on both sides. For Russia, if you attack, the US and other European countries are militarily going to come to Ukraine's defence, and on the other hand, Ukraine, if you attack, Ukraine is going to lose its Article 5 security guarantee and be fighting without allies. So with that, you now know the difference between Article 5 like and NATO.